The Great Assembly floated in the void between galaxies, a massive structure built from the combined efforts of 2,000 civilizations. Its walls were made of crystallized starlight, and its chambers stretched across dimensions that smaller species could not even perceive. Today, those ancient halls trembled with fear. Ambassador Chen Wei walked through corridors that had witnessed 10,000 years of peace. Her shoes clicked against floors that had been polished smooth by countless alien appendages. Around her, species from across known space rushed in panicked clusters. The Kelthari, tall beings of pure energy, flickered with anxiety. The quorum delegates, massive creatures with bodies like floating mountains, spoke in deep rumbles that shook the air. Even the eternal minds, ancient artificial intelligences housed in crystal matrices, showed signs of distress in their pulsing lights. Chen had only been humanity's representative for 3 months. Her species had joined the Galactic Council just 5 years ago, barely noticed among civilizations that had mastered space travel before Earth's dinosaurs walked. Most elder species still considered humans to be children playing with toys they barely understood. She entered the grand chamber where the emergency session was already underway. The room was enormous, designed to accommodate species of vastly different sizes and environmental needs. Some delegates floated in tanks of methane. Others existed as patterns of sound in carefully maintained acoustic fields. The Kelthari ascendancy held the floor, their speaker a being of golden light named Threshold of Knowing. Another 17 systems have fallen, Threshold of Knowing announced. Their voice like wind through crystal chimes. The Voidborn advance continues. They do not conquer. They do not occupy. They erase. A holographic display filled the center of the chamber. Chen watched as star systems simply vanished from the map, replaced by spreading darkness. It was not the darkness of empty space. It was something worse, something hungry. "How many does that make?" asked Representative Column of the Granite Speakers, his rock-based form grinding with distress. 4,216 worlds, answered the chamber's central intelligence. Approximately 41% of known space. The rate of loss is accelerating. Chen had studied the reports obsessively since humanity learned of the Voidborn 3 weeks ago. The enemy had appeared 30 years earlier at the galaxy's edge. At first, they seemed like any other hostile force. The elder civilizations had sent their fleets confident in weapons refined over millennia. Those fleets never returned. The worlds they defended simply disappeared, torn from reality by dimensional rifts that swallowed everything within light years. The Kelthari ascendancy had been the greatest power in the galaxy for 8,000 years. Their technology could manipulate gravity, create artificial suns, and fold space itself. They threw everything at the Voidborn. Their weapons passed through the enemy like light through glass. Their shields offered no protection. Entire battle groups vanished in seconds, pulled into tears in reality that closed behind them like hungry mouths. The quorum of eternal minds had tried next. These ancient artificial intelligences could process information at speeds that made time itself seem slow. They analyzed patterns, predicted movements, created weapons designed specifically for the Voidborn's unique energy signatures. Nothing worked. The enemy adapted instantly to every strategy, every weapon, every defense. "We must consider evacuation," said a delegate from the Spiral Collective, their voice emerging from a swarm of small flying creatures that moved as one. "We could retreat to the Andromeda Galaxy, establish new, and abandon 4,000 worlds." Threshold of Knowing flared brighter with anger. "Abandon trillions of lives? We are the elder races. We have survived since the galaxy was young. We do not flee. Then what do you propose?" The question came from Elder Stone that dreams of the Granite Speakers. "We have tried force. We have tried intelligence. We have tried everything our combined wisdom can devise. The Voidborn are not just defeating us, they are erasing us from existence. Our people, our worlds, our very history disappears when they strike." The chamber fell silent. Shen had been listening carefully, taking notes on her small datapad. She raised her hand, the human gesture lost on many species, but the Council's systems recognized her request to speak. "The chair recognizes the human delegation," the Central Intelligence announced. Thousands of alien eyes, sensors and consciousness fields turned toward her. Chen felt very small. She stood and walked to the speaker's platform, her heart pounding. "Ambassador Chen Wei of Earth," she said. Her voice amplified across the chamber. "Humanity offers its military forces to assist in the defense." The chamber erupted, not with hope, but with what could only be described as condescending amusement. A Kelthari near the front made a sound like tinkling bells. Their species equivalent of laughter. No offense intended. Young one, Threshold of Knowing said with barely concealed contempt. But your species has barely left your home star system. You have been traveling between stars for less than a century. The Kelthari have fought wars longer than your entire civilization has existed. What could you possibly offer? Chen had expected this. She had prepared for it. We offer a fresh perspective. You said yourself that ancient wisdom has failed. Perhaps you need new thinking. New thinking? Another delegate spoke up, a quorum representative whose voice was pure mathematics translated into sound. We have computational capacity that exceeds your entire species' brain matter by factors of trillions. We have considered every possibility, every approach, every theoretical framework. There is no fresh perspective we have not already explored. Then why are you still losing? Chen asked quietly. The chamber went silent. It was a rude question by Galactic Council standards, dangerously close to insult. But it was also true. The human makes a point, Elder Stone That Dreams rumbled. We are the wisest species in the galaxy, yet we are being systematically destroyed by an enemy we do not understand. Perhaps wisdom has made us rigid. Rigid? Threshold of Knowing's light pulsed with indignation. We have adapted our tactics 17,000 times. We have created weapons that did not exist before this war. We have explored strategies that violate our most sacred principles. If that is rigid, then the warning alarms cut through the debate. Red lights flashed across every surface. The chamber's central intelligence spoke in an urgent tone that Chen had never heard before. Dimensional tier forming. Distance 2 light seconds. The Voidborn are here. The chamber dissolved into chaos. Delegates rushed for exits. Emergency shields activated, but everyone present knew they were useless. The Voidborn did not care about shields. Chen watched the holographic display as space itself seemed to tear open just outside the station. Through the rift, something moved. Not ships exactly. More like shapes that hurt to look at, as if reality itself was rejecting their presence. Chen's security detail, a team of 6 human soldiers led by Captain Maria Santos, immediately moved to surround her. Santos was a compact woman with scars across her face and eyes that had seen too much combat. Ambassador, we need to evacuate now, Santos said, her hand already on Chen's arm. Wait, Chen said, watching the display. Captain, do you see how they're moving? Ma'am, with respect, we don't have time for— They're hesitating, Chen interrupted. Look at the pattern. They come through the rift, pause, then advance, like they're waiting for something. Santos looked at the display, her tactical mind engaging despite the urgency. You're right. There's a 3-second delay after emergence, like they're scanning or receiving orders. Can we disrupt that? Santos's eyes widened. You want to engage them? Ma'am, every species here has said that's suicide. Every species here is running. Captain, your weapons. They use quantum disruption fields, don't they? For armor penetration, yes, but fire at the rift during that delay. Not at the Voidborn, at the tear itself. Santos hesitated for only a second, then spoke into her communicator. All units target the spatial anomaly. Quantum disruption on my mark. Firing pattern Delta 7. The human security team was small. Just 6 soldiers with weapons that looked primitive compared to the energy cannons and matter disruptors other species carried. But they were disciplined and fast. They raised their weapons and fired in perfect synchronization. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The rift flickered. The Voidborn shapes that had been emerging froze, as if the connection between dimensions had been interrupted. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the rift collapsed in on itself and the Voidborn vanished. The grand chamber fell completely silent. Every delegate, every intelligence, every consciousness present stared at the 6 human soldiers and their primitive weapons. Threshold of Knowing spoke first, their voice quiet and filled with something Chen had never heard from them before. Uncertainty. They drove them back. The humans drove them back. We didn't drive them back, Santos said, lowering her weapon. We disrupted their entry portal. They'll be back. But we bought some time. Elder Stone That Dreams moved forward, his massive form causing the floor to crack slightly under his weight. In 30 years of warfare, no species has successfully defended against a Voidborn assault. They appear and worlds die, yet you, with weapons we would consider outdated, managed to disrupt their attack. How? demanded the quorum representative. Our calculations showed that such an approach would be ineffective. We modeled quantum disruption fields against dimensional rifts. The energy requirements should have been orders of magnitude higher than your weapons could produce. We didn't try to close the rift, Chen said, understanding now what her team had done. We just made it unstable. She searched for an analogy. Like static on a communication channel. We couldn't stop the signal, but we could make it too noisy to use. The chamber's central intelligence spoke up. Analysis confirms the hypothesis. The human weapons created quantum interference patterns that destabilized the dimensional breach. The Voidborn could not maintain the connection. However, this appears to be more luck than strategy. The humans had no way of knowing this would work. Actually, Santos said, we did. Sort of. We've been studying the report since we learned about the Voidborn. We noticed that they always enter through rifts, and those rifts stay open during their attacks. It seemed like a vulnerability. In human military history, we have a saying, if the enemy has to keep a door open, blow up the doorway. Chen felt a surge of pride in her species. They were young, yes. They were inexperienced in galactic terms, but they had something the elder species had perhaps forgotten, the ability to see problems with fresh eyes. Threshold of knowing dimmed and brightened several times, a sign of deep thought in their species. When they spoke, the condescension was gone from their voice. Ambassador Chen Wei of Earth, humanity's offer of military assistance is accepted. We will need to study your tactics, your weapons, and your thinking. If you can disrupt one attack, perhaps you can teach us to disrupt others. There is more to learn here than tactics. Elderstone that dreams added. The humans saw a pattern we missed. They acted on incomplete information and succeeded where our certainty failed. Perhaps we have been too focused on what we know cannot work. We have forgotten to try what might work. The emergency session transformed into a strategy meeting. For the first time in 30 years, the Galactic Council spoke not of evacuation or despair, but of possibilities. Chen found herself at the center of it all, a representative of the youngest species in the galaxy, suddenly thrust into a position of importance. As the meeting continued into the station's artificial night, Santos approached Chen quietly. Ma'am, you know that was mostly luck, right? We disrupted one attack. There's no guarantee we can do it again. I know, Captain, Chen replied, watching the elder species debate with renewed energy. But right now, they don't need guarantees. They need hope. They need someone to show them that the Voidborn can be resisted. And if we fail? Chen looked at the star map, at the spreading darkness that represented the Voidborn's advance. She thought of Earth, of humanity's short but intense history, of all the times her species had faced impossible odds. Then we fail trying something new rather than succeeding at giving up. That has to count for something. In the depths of space, far from the Great Assembly, the Voidborn regrouped. The dimensional rift had been disrupted, but they would return. They always did. They had erased thousands of civilizations. What was one more? But for the first time in 30 years, they had been stopped, even briefly. And in the cosmic game of war and survival, even a brief pause could change everything. Humanity had entered the stage. The galaxy was watching, and nothing would ever be the same. The Terminus Front was where hope went to die. 3 months ago, it had been a thriving sector with 40 inhabited systems and trade routes that connected 3 major civilizations. Now it was a graveyard. 30 of those systems were simply gone, replaced by the spreading void that marked Voidborn territory. The remaining 10 were under siege, defended by a combined fleet of over 3,000 ships from a dozen different species. They had been trapped there for 67 days. Admiral Kwame Ose stood on the bridge of the UHSS Endurance, humanity's newest battleship. Around him, his crew moved with quiet efficiency, monitoring systems and coordinating with the other human vessels in their small fleet. 200 ships. That was all humanity could spare for this mission. The elder species had sent thousands. Admiral, the Kelthari battle group is requesting our position in the defensive formation, Commander Jackson reported from the tactical station. Kwame looked at the fleet display. The Allied forces were arranged in layers, with the most powerful ships at the front. The Kelthari energy vessels, capable of channeling starfire. The Quorum fortress ships, mobile planets with computational power that could predict enemy movements. The Granite Speaker world ships, asteroids carved into battle stations that could shrug off planet-killing weapons. And in the back, marked with what could only be described as visual dismissal, the human fleet. 200 small vessels that looked like toys compared to the elder species' magnificent warships. "Tell them we'll take a forward position," Kwame said calmly. The bridge went quiet. Commander Jackson turned to look at him. "Sir, did you say forward?" "You heard correctly, Commander. Request permission to form the vanguard." "Admiral, with respect, the Kelthari will laugh at us. They've already made it clear they expect us to provide support fire at best." Kwame smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Then let's give them something to think about besides laughter. Send the request." The response came back in less than a minute. Threshold of Knowing's voice filled the bridge, transmitted across the fleet communication network. "Human Admiral Osei, your offer is appreciated but unnecessary. The vanguard position requires vessels capable of withstanding sustained void-borne assault. No offense intended, but your fleet lacks the defensive capabilities for such a role." "None taken," Kwame replied. "But we're not asking to defend, we're asking to observe. We want to study the void-borne up close." There was a pause. "Study them? Admiral, we have been fighting the void-borne for 30 years. We have gathered more data than your species could analyze in centuries. What could you possibly learn that we have not?" "Maybe nothing," Kwame admitted. "But Ambassador Chen disrupted a void-borne attack by looking at it differently. We'd like to try the same approach. If we fail, you lose 200 ships you didn't think were useful anyway. If we succeed, everyone benefits." Another pause, longer this time. Kwame could imagine the debate happening on the Kelthari command ship. Finally, Threshold of Knowing responded. "Very well. The human fleet will take forward observation position, but we will not risk the formation to rescue you if you are overrun." "Understood. We don't expect you to." The human fleet moved forward, slipping through the gaps in the massive elder species formations. As they passed the Keltharia vessels, Kwame saw the energy beings watching them. He could not read their expressions, but he could imagine what they were thinking. Young species. Foolish. Brave perhaps, but doomed. Let them think it. Kwame had not told them the real reason he wanted a forward position. It was not just to observe. It was because the human fleet carried something the elder species did not. Dr. Yuki Tanaka and her research team. Tanaka was on the Endurance now, in a laboratory that had been hastily converted from a cargo bay. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that seemed to look through things rather than at them. She had been studying the void-borne data for 3 weeks straight, barely sleeping, driven by an obsession that Kwame recognized because he shared it. He found her surrounded by holographic displays showing dimensional mathematics that made his head hurt. "Dr. Tanaka, we're in position," he said. She did not look up from her work. "Good. I need live data. The recordings the elder species provided are too filtered. They run everything through their analysis systems before storing it. I need raw observations." "What are you looking for?" "Proof of a theory." She finally looked at him, and Kwame saw exhaustion and excitement fighting in her expression. "Admiral, what if the Voidborn are not invincible? What if they're just somewhere else?" "I'm not sure I follow." Tanaka gestured at one of the displays which showed a diagram of layered space. "Our universe exists in 3 spatial dimensions, but quantum theory has suggested for centuries that there are more dimensions we cannot perceive. What if the Voidborn exist partially in those other dimensions? When our weapons pass through them, it's not because they're intangible. It's because most of their mass is somewhere we can't hit." Kwame felt his pulse quicken. "Like a shadow. If you try to punch a shadow on a wall, your fist goes right through because the real object is somewhere else." "Exactly. And, if I'm right, then the dimensional rifts they use to travel are not just portals. They're bridges. The Voidborn are pulling our universe toward theirs, or vice versa. That's why worlds disappear. They're not being destroyed. They're being relocated to wherever the Voidborn exist." "Can you prove this?" "Not with filtered data. I need to measure the dimensional frequency of an active rift. And for that I need to be close. Very close." Kwame understood now why she had pushed so hard for this mission. "How close?" close enough that the rift's energy field is measurable above background radiation, approximately 1,000 kilometers. Doctor, at that range will be inside their weapons envelope. I know. She met his eyes. But if I'm right, we can find them. And if we can find them, we can fight them. The Voidborn attacked 6 hours later. The fleet's sensors detected the dimensional tear forming at the edge of the terminus front. It was massive, larger than any rift recorded before. Threshold of Knowing's voice echoed across all command channels. All vessels, defensive formation. Prepare for assault. The elder species ships moved with practiced precision, energy shields activated, weapons charged. It was a dance they had performed countless times, always with the same result. The Voidborn would emerge, weapons would fail to stop them, and ships would die. But this time the human fleet moved differently. Instead of falling back to defensive positions, they accelerated forward. Human fleet, you are moving in the wrong direction, Threshold of Knowing transmitted urgently. Retreat to support positions immediately. Negative, Kwame replied calmly. We're going to take some readings. Admiral Osei, that is suicide. Probably, but we're doing it anyway. All ships, maintain formation. Full sensor sweep. Dr. Tanaka, you're up. In the laboratory, Tanaka was strapped into a chair surrounded by instruments that hummed with power. She had custom-built most of them from parts scavenged from human and alien technology. The elder species would have considered them primitive. She considered them perfect. The rift tore open space like a wound. Through it, the Voidborn emerged. Kwame had seen the recordings, but nothing prepared him for seeing them in person. They were not ships in any conventional sense. They were shapes that hurt to look at, geometries that should not exist in three-dimensional space. They moved without propulsion, advanced without acceleration. They simply were where they had not been a moment before. The human fleet raced toward them. Distance to Rift, 3,000 kilometers, Commander Jackson reported. His voice was steady, but Kwame could hear the tension underneath. 2,500. Sir, they're targeting us. Evasive pattern Delta, don't stop our approach. The Voidborn weapons fire was unlike anything Kwame had ever seen. It was not energy beams or projectiles. It was more like reality itself was being unwritten. Where the weapons struck, matter simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just absence. 2 human ships vanished in the first volley. Then 3 more. The fleet did not slow down. 1,000 kilometers, Jackson said. Doctor, I hope you're getting what you need. In the lab, Tanaka was surrounded by data streams that poured in faster than any human could process. But she had designed her instruments to look for specific patterns, specific frequencies. And there, buried in the chaos of battle and the screaming of torn space, she found it. A signature. A frequency. A mathematical pattern that repeated across multiple dimensional layers. Got it, she breathed. Admiral, I have what we need. Get us out of here. All ships full reverse, Kwame ordered. Evasive pattern Omega. The human fleet scattered, each ship moving independently, making themselves difficult targets. It was a tactic the elder species had never tried because their massive ships could not maneuver that way. But human vessels were small and agile. They danced between the Voidborn weapons fire, losing ships but not formation. Behind them, the elder species fleet engaged. Weapons that could vaporize planets struck the Voidborn and passed through harmlessly. Shields that could withstand supernova shockwaves failed in seconds. It was the same story it had always been, except now the Voidborn seemed agitated. They had never had prey run toward them before, had never had anything get that close and survive. Their pattern changed. Instead of their usual methodical advance, they pushed forward more aggressively, chasing the retreating human ships. They're following us, Jackson observed. Why are they following us? Because we scared them, Kwame said with grim satisfaction. We did something unexpected. We got close. We survived, and that makes us a threat. The human fleet made it back to the elder species lines with only 42 ships lost. It was a devastating casualty rate by any measure. But they had achieved their goal. They had the data. Over the next 18 hours, while the Voidborn assault continued and the elder species fought their usual holding action, Tanaka worked. She barely spoke, barely ate, barely acknowledged the existence of anything outside her laboratory. Kwame had guards posted to make sure she at least drank water. When she finally emerged, the battle had been raging for a full day. The Allied fleet had lost 200 ships. The Voidborn had not lost any, because no one could figure out how to actually damage them. Tanaka went straight to the bridge. She looked worse than before, if that was possible, but her eyes were bright with discovery. "I found them," she said without preamble. Kwame turned from the tactical display.
Found what?
"The Voidborn. I found where they are." She brought up her data on the main display. It was a complex diagram that looked like space folded in on itself multiple times. They exist in a parallel dimensional layer. Not a separate universe exactly, more like a frequency we don't normally interact with. Imagine, she gestured, trying to find words for mathematical concepts that had no easy translation. Imagine that reality is like a radio signal. We exist on one frequency. The Voidborn exist on a frequency just slightly different. When they create rifts, they're not traveling. They're tuning. They're adjusting their frequency to match ours temporarily. If you can find their frequency, Kwame said slowly, can you track them? Better than that. I can follow them. Follow them where? Home. Tanaka pulled up another display, this one showing the trajectory of Voidborn movements over the past 30 years. Every time they attack, they eventually retreat back through the rifts. The elder species assumed those rifts led nowhere, or led to random points in space. But they're wrong. The rifts all lead to the same place, a dimensional pocket, a space that exists adjacent to our universe. That's where the Voidborn live. That's their home. Kwame stared at the data. You want to go there. I want to put a tracker through there. These rifts are bridges, Admiral. And bridges go both ways. The elder species will never approve something so risky. Tanaka smiled. It was not a nice smile. Then don't ask for approval. Ask for forgiveness later, Kwame considered. He had spent 30 years in military service. He had followed orders, respected the chain of command, done everything by the book. But the book had been written for normal wars against normal enemies. This was not a normal war. Commander Jackson, he said slowly. Prepare a stealth package. Smallest drone we have, maximum sensor capacity. Coat it with quantum dampening fields, sir. We're going to let the Voidborn win a battle, and we're going to follow them home. The plan was simple in concept, but difficult in execution. The human fleet would engage the Voidborn in what appeared to be a desperate attack. They would fight hard enough to be believable, but not so hard that they could not retreat. And when they retreated, they would leave behind a gift. The elder species commanders were outraged when Kwame proposed it. You want to lose intentionally? Threshold of knowing demanded. Admiral, we have lost enough already. We do not need to hand the Voidborn victories. It's not a victory if we learn something from it, Kwame argued. We need to know where they go. Every time they retreat, they take knowledge of our defenses, our capabilities. Why shouldn't we learn something about them? Because they kill everything that gets close to them. Not everything. We proved that. We got close. We survived. We can do it again. The argument raged for hours. In the end, Elderstone that Dreams cast the deciding vote. Let the humans try. They have surprised us before. Perhaps they will do so again. And if they fail, we are no worse off than we were. 3 days later, the human fleet staged their attack. They hit a Voidborn formation at the Kepler Nexus, a resource-rich system the enemy had been systematically consuming. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Human ships danced and dodged, fired weapons they knew would not work, and put on a show of desperate resistance, and when they retreated, falling back in what looked like panicked disorder, they left behind something small, something the Voidborn would not notice among the debris of destroyed ships and the chaos of torn space. A drone, no larger than a fist, coated in materials that bent sensor waves around it, equipped with a dimensional tracker that would record whatever frequency the Voidborn shifted to when they retreated. The Voidborn consumed the Kepler Nexus. They tore the planets apart, pulled the star itself into a dimensional rift and erased the system from existence. Then, as they always did, they retreated through their portal, and the drone went with them. For 3 seconds, the drone's signal was clear. Then it crossed the dimensional threshold and vanished from all conventional sensors. But Tanaka's equipment, tuned to the specific frequency she had discovered, could still detect it. Faint, distorted, but present. She tracked it for 17 minutes before the signal died. 17 minutes was not long, but it was long enough to triangulate a location, to establish a coordinate, to mark a point in space-time dimension that could be found again. Tanaka looked at Kwame with tears in her eyes. We found it. We found their home. Kwame stared at the data. Somewhere in that dimensional pocket, in that space that existed alongside their universe, the Voidborn lived. For 30 years they had attacked with impunity, safe in the knowledge that no one could reach them. For 30 years, the galaxy had fought a defensive war, always reactive, never able to strike back. But now they had an address. Dr. Tanaka, Kwame said quietly, how many people in the galaxy know about dimensional travel? Theoretically, thousands. Practically, maybe a dozen. It's considered possible but suicidal. Every civilization that tried it either failed or never came back. Then I suppose we're going to be civilization number 13. In the depths of space, in layers of reality the elder species could barely imagine, the Voidborn did not know they had been tracked. They did not know that their home had been found. They had been the hunters for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to be prey. But they were about to remember, because humanity had done the impossible twice now. They had disrupted a Voidborn attack. They had tracked the Voidborn home, and if the galaxy was watching, it was about to see humanity do something no other species had dared. They were going to take the fight to the enemy. The Grand Assembly had never been so divided. Ambassador Chen Wei watched as civilizations that had stood together for thousands of years now shouted at each other across the great chamber. Some delegates had abandoned the pretense of civilized debate entirely. The Keltari flickered with agitation. The granite speakers ground their stone bodies together in distress. Even the eternal minds showed signs of computational stress in their erratic light patterns. At the center of it all stood Admiral Kwame Osi, presenting data that should have been impossible. We tracked them, he said again, his voice calm despite the chaos. The Voidborn have a home, a dimensional pocket that exists parallel to our universe. These coordinates represent the location where we can access it. Madness, declared Threshold of Knowing, their golden light pulsing with barely controlled anger. You speak of dimensional travel as if it were a simple journey. Do you have any idea how many civilizations have attempted what you propose? 12, Kwame answered immediately. 12 civilizations over the past 8,000 years have tried to breach dimensional barriers. None returned. I've read the reports, and yet you propose we do the same. I propose we do it differently. That brought a moment of silence. Chen watched Kwame carefully. He had changed over the past 2 weeks. The weight of command, of watching ships under his leadership die in the name of knowledge, had carved lines into his face. But his eyes remained steady. The previous attempts failed because they treated dimensional travel as a scientific expedition, Kwame continued. They sent their best ships, their finest minds, equipped with the most advanced technology. They approached it with confidence born of millennia of technological supremacy. And you believe your primitive vessels will succeed where they failed? A quorum representative interjected, their mathematical voice dripping with skepticism. I believe our vessels won't go in assuming we're the smartest beings in the room. The elder species failed because they expected their technology to solve every problem. Humans don't have that luxury. We're used to being outmatched. We're used to finding solutions with incomplete information and inadequate resources. Elder Stone that dreams rumbled forward, his massive form making the floor crack. Admiral Osi, you speak with passion, but passion does not protect against dimensional collapse. The reports from the failed expeditions are clear. The barriers between dimensions are not meant to be crossed. Those who tried were torn apart by forces we barely understand. Ships were compressed to singularities. Crews were spread across infinite space. Some vessels simply ceased to exist, erased from every timeline simultaneously. I know, Kwame said quietly. I've read those reports too. Every single one. Do you know what they all have in common? Failure, hesitation. Every expedition sent probes first, ran thousands of simulations, approached the dimensional barrier slowly, cautiously, scientifically. And every time the barrier adapted to what they were trying to do, it's almost like, he paused, choosing his words carefully, like the barrier itself is intelligent, or at least reactive. Dr. Tanaka stepped forward. She had been silent until now, letting Kwame handle the politics. But this was her area of expertise. The dimensional barriers are not walls. They're more like membranes. They react to stress, to probing, to attempts at penetration. The more carefully you examine them, the more they reinforce themselves against you. It's a quantum observation problem at a cosmic scale. Then how do you propose to cross? Asked a representative of the Spiral Collective, their swarm body buzzing with curiosity rather than hostility. We don't cross carefully, Tanaka said. We punch through fast and hard before the barrier can react. Like breaking through thin ice. If you walk slowly, you fall through. If you run fast enough, you make it across. The chamber erupted again. This time the shouts were not just of disagreement, but of horror at the recklessness being proposed. You would gamble everything on a metaphor? Threshold of Knowing's light flared bright enough to hurt human eyes. You would risk ships and lives on a theory that dimensional barriers behave like frozen water? It's not just a metaphor, Tanaka insisted. I've been studying the data from the failed expeditions. Every single one showed the same pattern. The longer they stayed near the barrier, the more unstable it became. But the Voidborn cross in seconds. They don't hesitate. They don't probe. They just go. Because they evolved to travel that way, a quorum representative argued. They are dimensional beings. We are not. What is natural for them would be death for us. Maybe, Tanaka admitted, but we'll never know unless we try. Chen had been listening carefully to both sides. Now she stood and requested recognition. The chamber's central intelligence acknowledged her and the debates quieted. We are having the wrong argument, she said clearly. We are debating whether this mission is possible. But the real question is whether we have any choice. Explain. Elderstone That Dreams rumbled. The Voidborn have erased 43% of known space. The rate of loss is accelerating. At current projections, they will reach Earth in 7 months. They will reach the Kelthari core worlds in 9 months. They will reach every civilization in this chamber within 2 years. She let that sink in. We are already facing extinction. The only question is whether we face it passively or actively. You speak of false choices, Threshold of Knowing said, but their voice had lost some of its certainty. We could evacuate, retreat to other galaxies, rebuild. And how long before the Voidborn follow? How long before they tear through the barriers between galaxies as easily as they tear through space? You said it yourself, they don't conquer, they erase. There is no negotiating with them. There is no surrender. There is only survival or extinction. The chamber fell silent. Chen saw it in their eyes, their sensors, their consciousness fields, the recognition of truth. They had been avoiding this conclusion for months, perhaps years. They had been hoping for a miracle, for a solution that would not require risking everything. But miracles did not come to those who waited. A new voice spoke up. It came from the back of the chamber, from a section Chen had not noticed before. The voice was young, as the elder species measured such things. It belonged to Commander Vex of the Kelthari, a being who had only achieved consciousness 2 centuries ago. I volunteer, Vex said. For the dimensional expedition, I volunteer my ship and my crew. Threshold of Knowing turned their light toward the young commander. Vex, you do not understand what you are offering. I understand perfectly, Threshold. I understand that the elder generation has tried everything within their experience and failed. I understand that the humans, barely a century into space travel, have accomplished what we could not. They disrupted a Voidborn attack. They tracked the enemy home. Perhaps it is time we learned from them instead of lecturing them. Other voices began to join Vex. Young commanders from various species, officers who had come of age during the Voidborn War and knew nothing but retreat and loss. They saw in humanity's reckless courage something their own civilizations had lost, the willingness to try the impossible. This is madness, an older quorum representative protested. You would follow these children into oblivion? Better than sitting here waiting for oblivion to come to us, Commander Vex replied. The humans have a saying, fortune favors the bold. Perhaps it is time we remembered what boldness looks like. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Chen had expected. The elder leadership largely opposed the mission. They saw it as wasteful, suicidal, a desperate gamble that would cost lives without achieving anything. But the younger generation, across species lines, voted overwhelmingly in favor. They had grown up with the Voidborn threat. They had seen worlds die, civilizations erased, and all the ancient wisdom of the galaxy failed to stop it. They were ready to try something new. The final tally was narrow but decisive. The Dimensional Expeditionary Force was approved. 50 human ships would form the core. 30 volunteer vessels from other species would join them. It was a tiny force compared to the thousands of ships in the regular fleet. But everyone understood what it represented, the galaxy's last desperate attempt to strike back. As the chamber cleared, Chen found herself surrounded by young alien officers eager to coordinate with the human fleet. They asked questions about tactics, about human psychology, about how a species so young could be so brave. Chen answered as best she could, but she knew the truth. Humans were not uniquely brave. They were uniquely inexperienced. They did not know enough to understand how impossible their task was. Maybe that was an advantage. Kwame found her hours later, after the last of the volunteers had left. He looked exhausted. "We got our mission," he said without preamble. "Now we have to figure out how to actually do it. The technology is being provided by the Keltari remnant. Threshold of Knowing may hate this plan, but they're not sabotaging it. They're giving us access to ancient dimensional gateway technology. Theoretical stuff mostly. None of it has been tested, of course not. Everyone who tested it died." Kwame laughed, a harsh sound. "Dr. Tanaka is already working with their scientists. She thinks she can modify the gateway to work with our quantum disruption fields. It's all theoretical. We're building a ship designed to survive something no one has ever survived." Chen looked out at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent walls. "How long do we have?" 3 weeks to prepare. The Voidborn are pushing hard. We think they know something is happening. They're attacking more aggressively. If we wait too long, there might not be a fleet left to launch. And the crews? You're asking people to volunteer for what everyone agrees is a suicide mission? I'm not asking anyone I wouldn't go with myself. I'll be commanding the expedition personally. Chen had expected this, but it still hit hard. Kwame was one of the few human officers who understood both human and alien military doctrine. Losing him would hurt humanity's war effort. But she also understood why he had to go. Some missions required the presence of true believers. Over the next 3 weeks, the Dimensional Expeditionary Force took shape. The human ships were refitted with experimental quantum stabilizers, technology cobbled together from human engineering and Kelthari theory. The volunteer alien vessels were similarly modified. Everything was untested. Everything was theoretical. They were literally building their survival equipment based on educated guesses about how dimensional physics worked. The crews trained for scenarios no one could accurately predict. How do you prepare to enter a space where the laws of physics might be different? Dr. Tanaka ran them through simulations, but she was honest about the limitations. "These simulations are guesses," she told them bluntly. "The Voidborn dimension might be nothing like what I'm showing you. Or it might be worse. The only thing I can promise is that reality will not work the way you're used to." On the final night before launch, the crews were given time to record messages for their families. Some wrote long letters. Some recorded videos. Some simply stared at communication screens, unable to find words for what might be their final goodbye. This was not a normal military deployment. This was a one-way trip into the unknown with no expectation of return. Lieutenant Maria Santos, now commanding her own ship in the expedition, recorded a message for her daughter. "I'm sorry I won't be there to watch you grow up," she said to the camera. "But I hope you understand why I have to do this. The Voidborn would reach Earth eventually. Better that we face them now, on our terms, than wait for them to bring the fight to you." She deleted the recording and started over 4 times before she was satisfied. Even then, she knew the words were inadequate. The launch ceremony was brief. The Galactic Council assembled to witness the departure, but there were no grand speeches, no triumphant music. Everyone knew what this mission represented. These ships were not expected to return. These crews were not expected to survive. This was not a strategic deployment. This was a sacrifice. Ambassador Chen stood on the observation deck of the Great Assembly, watching the 80 ships form up in space. They looked so small against the backdrop of stars, so fragile. 50 human vessels, barely larger than the shuttles the elder species used for planetary transport. 30 alien volunteers, ships from a dozen civilizations who had put aside millennia of technological pride to follow humanity's lead. Commander Vex's ship was among them, a Kelthari energy vessel that pulsed with golden light. The young commander had fought against their elders' wishes to join this mission. Now they sailed alongside humans who their species had dismissed as primitive just weeks ago. "Do you think they'll succeed?" asked Elder Stone That Dreams, who had joined Chen on the observation deck. "I think they'll try," Chen answered. "And sometimes trying is enough. The humans have changed us," the ancient being rumbled thoughtfully. Not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple act of refusing to accept defeat. They have reminded us what it means to fight. Let's hope that's enough. The fleet activated their dimensional gateways. Space itself began to tear around them. Not the violent ripping of a void-born portal, but a careful, controlled opening. Tanaka's modifications were working. The barriers between dimensions began to thin, and then, in a flash of light that seemed to exist in colors that should not be possible, the dimensional expeditionary force vanished from normal space. The observation deck was silent. Every delegate, every consciousness, every being present understood the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. A tiny fleet of barely 80 ships had just done what 12 previous civilizations had failed to do. They had crossed into the Voidborn's dimension. Will we ever see them again? Someone asked. No one had an answer. In the depths of dimensional space, beyond the barriers of reality, the 80 ships emerged into nightmare. This was not space as they knew it. This was something else, something wrong, but they were through. They had crossed the barrier. And now, for the first time in 30 years of war, the galaxy had brought the fight to the Voidborn's doorstep. What happened next would determine the fate of every living thing in the universe. The expedition had crossed into the unknown. There was no turning back. There was only forward, and somewhere in the twisted dimensions ahead the Voidborn waited, about to learn what it meant to be hunted. The first thing Admiral Kwame Ose noticed when they crossed the dimensional barrier was the silence. Space was never truly silent, of course. There were radiation frequencies, particle movements, the background hum of existence itself. But here, in the Voidborn dimension, all of that was gone. It was not just an absence of sound. It was an absence of everything familiar. Then the screaming started. Systems failing across all decks, Commander Jackson reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, gravity fluctuating. Hull integrity compromised on decks 7 through 9. Sir, the ship is coming apart. Around them, 5 human vessels simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in explosions or torn apart by forces. They just stopped being there, as if reality had decided they never existed in the first place. Kwame watched crew members he had served with for years vanish along with their ships. Erased so completely that he found himself struggling to remember their names. All ships, emergency stabilization, Kwame ordered. Activate quantum anchors now! The quantum anchors were Dr. Tanaka's invention. Theoretical devices that were supposed to lock their ships to the physical laws they knew. They had never been tested because testing them required being in another dimension. Now they would find out if they worked. The stabilization was not instant. For several seconds that felt like hours. The endurance phased between existence and non-existence. Kwame could see through his own hands. The bridge crew flickered like bad holographic projections. The ship's hull became transparent, then solid, then transparent again. Then, with a sound like reality snapping back into place, they stabilized. The quantum anchors worked, barely. The ship was solid again. The crew stopped flickering. But 5 ships were gone, and everyone knew they had barely survived the first seconds. Damage report, Kwame demanded. 23% of the fleet lost in transition, Jackson said grimly. All remaining ships are damaged but stable. The alien volunteers, he paused, checking his screens. They're in worse shape. Their technology wasn't designed for this. 3 Kelthari vessels are barely holding together. The Granite speaker ship has lost all mobility. They're alive but stranded. And the Voidborn? No sign yet. But Admiral, you need to see this. Jackson brought up the main view screen and Kwame felt his breath catch. They had emerged into what could only be described as a dying universe. The sky, if it could be called that, was a sickly purple that hurt to look at. Stars existed here, but they were wrong. They pulsed with irregular rhythms as if they were in pain. Some were being pulled apart by forces that should not exist. Their matter streaming toward massive dark rifts that hung in space like wounds. And everywhere, there were ships. Not Voidborn attackers, but derelicts. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Ships from civilizations Kwame recognized and many he did not. The previous 12 expeditions that had tried to cross the dimensional barrier. They had not been destroyed. They had made it through. They had just never made it back. My God, Commander Jackson whispered. They all made it this far. And died here, Kwame finished grimly. Dr. Tanaka, please tell me you're seeing this. In her laboratory, Tanaka was surrounded by displays that showed impossible physics. Space here did not follow the rules. Time flowed in multiple directions simultaneously. Gravity pointed in ways that made no sense, and energy, the very substance of reality, was being slowly drained away by something massive at the center of this pocket dimension. "Admiral," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and excitement, "I'm detecting a massive energy drain. Everything in this dimension is being pulled toward a central point. It's like," she struggled for words, "like this entire pocket universe is collapsing inward, slowly but inevitably. Can we survive here? For a while? Maybe days, maybe hours. The quantum anchors are holding us to our physical laws, but the drain is constant. We're fighting against the nature of this space itself. Eventually we'll lose. Then we'd better work fast. Find the Voidborn. Find out what's here." The fleet moved deeper into the dimension, carefully avoiding the derelict ships and the rifts that seemed to devour everything. The alien volunteers stayed close to the human vessels. Commander Vex's ship had taken significant damage in the crossing, but the young Kelthari refused to turn back. "We came this far," Vex transmitted. "We will see it through." They found the first Voidborn settlement 3 hours later. It was not what anyone expected. The elder species had always assumed the Voidborn were some kind of hostile intelligence, perhaps even machines. But what the expedition found was a city, a massive, sprawling structure built around one of the dying stars. And it was filled with life. Millions of Voidborn. Billions, perhaps. They moved through structures that looked organic, as if the city itself was alive and growing. But everything about the settlement spoke of desperation. The buildings were built on top of each other with no planning, no order. The Voidborn moved in frantic patterns, as if constantly searching for something. "They're refugees," Lieutenant Santos said from her ship, the recognition clear in her voice. "This isn't an invasion force's home. This is a refugee camp." Dr. Tanaka's scans confirmed it. "The dimension is collapsing. Has been for centuries, maybe longer. The Voidborn are harvesting energy from our universe because theirs is dying. Every time they create a rift, they pull matter and energy through to sustain themselves. So the worlds they've been erasing," Commander Jackson said slowly. "They're not destroying them. They're converting them to energy," Tanaka finished, "pulling them into this dimension and consuming them to stave off the collapse. They're not conquerors, Admiral. They're survivors doing whatever it takes to live." The realization hit the crew hard. For 30 years, the galaxy had fought what they thought was an alien invasion. But it was not an invasion. It was a desperate attempt at survival by a species facing extinction. The Voidborn had not attacked out of malice. They had attacked because they were dying. "Does it matter?" Santos asked harshly. "They're still killing us. Intent doesn't change the body count." She was right, and Kwame knew it. Understanding the enemy's motivation did not make their victims any less dead. But it changed the equation. An invasion could be defeated by destroying the invaders. But refugees fighting for survival would fight until there was nothing left to fight with. "We need to find their command structure," Kwame decided. "Their leaders. Someone we can talk to." "Talk to?" Jackson sounded incredulous. "Sir, they've erased 4,000 worlds. What makes you think they'll talk?" "Because we're here. Because we did what no one else has done. We came to them. That has to mean something." The fleet pressed deeper into Voidborn space, past settlements and energy collection facilities. They saw the infrastructure of a civilization on the brink. Everything was focused on survival, on extracting every possible unit of energy from their dying dimension and from the raids they conducted into normal space. They also saw the cost. Dead Voidborn floated everywhere, not killed in battle but simply expired. Their dimensional forms had dissipated, unable to maintain cohesion in the collapsing space. The Voidborn were not just killing other species. They were dying themselves. The fleet encountered resistance eventually. Voidborn ships, if they could be called ships, moved to intercept. But these were not the terrifying attackers that had ravaged the galaxy. These were defenders, and they looked scared. "Sir, they're not attacking," Jackson observed. "They're surrounding us, but they're not firing." Because we're in their home, Kwame realized. In our space, they're invincible. Here, they're vulnerable. They don't know what we'll do. "Admiral," Santos transmitted urgently, "I'm picking up a massive energy signature ahead. It's orders of magnitude larger than anything else we've detected." "The Queen Nexus," Tanaka breathed. "That has to be it. The central intelligence that maintains the dimensional rifts. It's how they coordinate their attacks across such vast distances. Without it, they can't access our universe." The fleet approached the energy signature carefully. What they found was beyond comprehension. It was a structure that existed partially in multiple dimensions at once. A massive organic-looking construction that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. Energy flowed through it in patterns that made Dr. Tanaka weep with frustration because she could not fully understand them. And within it, something aware. Something intelligent. Something that had been watching them since they arrived. The communication came not in words but in images, feelings, concepts transmitted directly into their minds. It was uncomfortable, alien, but comprehensible. The Queen Nexus was speaking to them. The message was simple. Why have you come? Kwame found himself speaking aloud, knowing somehow that the entity could understand him. To find you. To understand why you're attacking us. To stop the war. More images flooded his mind. The void-born dimension, vibrant and alive millennia ago. Then the slow collapse, the realization that their universe was dying. The desperate search for solutions. The discovery of rifts leading to other dimensions, to universes still alive and full of energy. The terrible choice between extinction and survival through the destruction of others. We did not choose this war, the Queen Nexus communicated. We chose life. Your species would do the same. Maybe, Kwame admitted, but there has to be another way. You're killing us to survive, but you're dying anyway. Look at your dimension. How long do you think you can hold it together? A century, too? Eventually you'll run out of universes to raid. We know, came the response, heavy with sorrow. We have always known, but we are not ready to die. Neither are we. The standoff lasted for hours. The fleet held position, weapons ready but not firing. The void-born defenders surrounded them, also waiting. And at the center, the Queen Nexus considered the first enemy that had ever come to talk rather than fight. It was Dr. Tanaka who finally broke the impasse. She had been studying the energy flows, the dimensional structure, the physics of this dying universe. And she had seen something the Voidborn, for all their desperate intelligence, had missed. Admiral, she transmitted, I think I have a solution, but it's going to sound insane. Everything about this mission is insane, Doctor. What do you have? We can't save their dimension. It's too far gone. But we might be able to create a new one. A pocket dimension, small but stable, big enough for the Voidborn to survive without raiding other universes. Kwame felt his heart race. Is that even possible? The Kelthari have dimensional gateway technology. We've been using it to cross barriers, but theoretically the same technology could create barriers, carve out a small piece of dimensional space and stabilize it. It would require enormous energy, but she hesitated. The Queen Nexus is already generating that level of energy to maintain the rifts. If we could redirect it, use it to create instead of to connect, we could give them a new home, a smaller one. They'd have to reduce their population, live more efficiently, but it would be stable. It wouldn't collapse. They wouldn't need to raid other universes to survive. Kwame transmitted the concept to the Queen Nexus, letting Tanaka's data flow through their connection. For a long moment there was silence. Then images flooded back. Not of rejection, but of desperate hope. This is possible. The Queen Nexus's question was urgent. You can create such a space? We think so. But we need your help. Your energy generation, our gateway technology combined. It's never been tried. It might fail. It might kill everyone here. Better a chance at life than slow extinction, came the response. But not all the Voidborn agreed. The fleet's sensors detected massive energy surges from multiple directions. Voidborn ships, hundreds of them, were converging on their position. These were not defenders. These were extremists who preferred death in battle to peace with those they saw as prey. All ships defensive formation, Kwame ordered. Dr. Tanaka, how long do you need? To build a new dimension from scratch? Days, weeks, I don't know. You have hours, maybe less. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the fleet's experience. The Voidborn extremists attacked with suicidal fury, throwing themselves at the human and alien ships. But here in the Voidborn dimension, the rules were different. The attackers were not invincible. Human weapons designed to disrupt dimensional stability actually worked here. Lieutenant Santos led her ship in a desperate defense of the Queen Nexus. Her vessel had been damaged in the crossing and was barely functional, but she fought with everything she had. When her weapons failed, she used her ship itself as a battering ram, slamming into Voidborn attackers to drive them back. Commander Vex's Kelthari ship, wounded but not defeated, channeled pure energy into defensive barriers that protected the human vessels. Other alien volunteers, species that had never fought together before, coordinated their attacks with practiced precision. And at the center of it all, Dr. Tanaka worked. She pulled engineers from every ship in the fleet, human and alien alike. Together they began to construct the impossible, a new dimension. They combined Kelthari gateway technology with human quantum mechanics, threw in principles from a dozen other species, and held it all together with hope and desperation. The Queen Nexus provided the energy, redirecting the massive flows that had been maintaining thousands of rifts into normal space. As those rifts closed, the Voidborn's ability to raid the galaxy ended. But it also meant there was no turning back. If this failed, the Voidborn would be trapped in their collapsing dimension with no way to gather the energy they needed to survive. Hours passed. The battle raged. Ships died on both sides. Santos's vessel finally gave out, engines dead, systems failing. She and her crew evacuated just before it was torn apart by Voidborn weapons. They were picked up by a granite speaker ship, rescued by a species they had only met weeks before. And then, just as the fleet was about to be overwhelmed, something happened. Reality bent, not broke, but folded in on itself in a way that should not be possible. Dr. Tanaka's creation activated. A new pocket dimension came into existence. It was small, barely large enough for a few solar systems, but it was stable. The collapse that had been consuming the Voidborn's universe did not exist there. Energy flowed in sustainable patterns. The laws of physics, while different from normal space, were consistent and survivable. It was not the vast empire the Voidborn had once possessed. But it was home. It was life. It was enough. The Queen Nexus's presence filled every mind in the fleet. Not words, but pure emotion. Gratitude, wonder, hope. Things the Voidborn had not felt in centuries. "You have given us life," the entity communicated. "We will not forget." The Voidborn began to migrate, millions of them flowing into the new dimension. They left behind their dying universe, their desperate settlements, their war machines. Some of the extremists refused to go, choosing to die fighting rather than accept peace. But most saw the gift for what it was, a second chance. As the last Voidborn crossed into their new home, the Queen Nexus spoke one final time to Admiral Kwame Osei. "Tell your people," it said. "Tell your galaxy. The Voidborn will raid no more. The war is over. And it ended not because you destroyed us, but because you showed us another way." The dimensional gateway back to normal space opened. It was different from the violent rifts the Voidborn had created. This was controlled, gentle, a proper bridge between dimensions. The fleet, battered and depleted, began the journey home. They had lost 60% of their ships. 48 vessels would never see home again. But the crews who remained carried with them something that had been missing from the galaxy for 30 years. Hope. The war was over. Not through superior firepower or ancient wisdom, but through the simple act of seeing the enemy as something other than a monster. Through the courage to offer mercy instead of vengeance. As the fleet crossed back into normal space, they did not know what reception awaited them. They did not know if the galaxy would celebrate their victory or condemn their choice to spare the enemy. They only knew that they had done something impossible. They had entered the Voidborn's dimension, fought them on their home ground, and won not by destroying them, but by saving them. And in that moment, humanity proved something that would echo through galactic history. The greatest weapon was not the strongest gun or the smartest strategy. It was the willingness to see the person behind the monster and to offer them a hand instead of a fist. The fleet emerged into normal space, battered but alive. And the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the ships that were never supposed to return came home, carrying news that would change everything. The Voidborn were gone. Not destroyed, saved, and the universe would never be the same. The Great Assembly was silent when the dimensional gateway opened. Every delegate, every consciousness, every being present had gathered to witness what they assumed would be a memorial service. The Dimensional Expeditionary Force had been gone for 17 days. 17 days without contact, without any sign they still existed. The galaxy had accepted what seemed inevitable. The fleet was lost. Another failed expedition to add to the list of 12 before it. Then space tore open, and ships began to emerge. Not 80 ships, 32. Battered, damaged, some barely holding together. But alive. Against all probability, against all expectation, they had returned. Ambassador Chen Wei stood on the observation deck, tears streaming down her face. She watched as the UHSS Endurance, Admiral Kwame Osi's flagship, limped through the gateway. Its hull was scarred with damage that should have been fatal. Entire sections were exposed to vacuum. But it was flying, and Kwame was alive. The assembly erupted into chaos, but this time it was not anger or fear. It was shock, disbelief, and slowly, cautiously hope. Impossible, Threshold of Knowing whispered, their golden light flickering with emotions they had thought lost. They survived. The humans survived. Not just survived, Elderstone That Dreams rumbled, his ancient voice filled with wonder. Look at the gateway. It's stable, controlled. This is not a desperate escape. This is a planned return. Kwame's transmission came through on all channels. His voice was tired, worn down by weeks of impossible stress, but it was steady. Grand Assembly, this is Admiral Kwame Ose of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. I am pleased to report that our mission was a success. The Voidborn threat has been neutralized. The chamber went silent again, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of a galaxy holding its breath. Neutralized? A quorum representative finally asked. Admiral, are you claiming you destroyed the Voidborn? No, Kwame replied. We saved them. For the next 6 hours, the returning crews told their story. They spoke of the dying dimension, the desperate refugee civilization, the Queen Nexus that had coordinated the attacks. They explained Dr. Tanaka's solution, the creation of a new pocket dimension. They showed data, recordings, evidence of what they had found and what they had done. Some delegates reacted with anger. How dare humanity spare an enemy that had killed trillions? How dare they offer mercy to monsters who had erased worlds? But as the story unfolded, as the full picture became clear, even the angriest voices fell silent. They were dying, Commander Vex explained to the assembly. The young Keltari's light was dim from exhaustion, but they spoke with conviction. We went expecting to find evil. We found desperation. They raided our universe because theirs was collapsing. They killed because the alternative was their own extinction. And what happens when their new dimension runs out of energy? Demanded one of the elder Kelthari. What happens when they need more resources? Will they not simply begin raiding again? Dr. Tanaka stepped forward. She had barely slept since returning, too busy compiling data and analyzing what they had learned. The new dimension is stable, self-sustaining. The energy flows are balanced. The Voidborn will not need to raid other universes. They will have to live more efficiently, maintain a smaller population, but they will survive. You are asking us to trust them, Threshold of Knowing said quietly, to trust beings who have caused so much death. I'm asking you to trust that survival instinct cuts both ways, Kwame replied. They attacked because they were desperate. Now they're not desperate anymore. The calculus has changed. War no longer benefits them. And if you're wrong, if they attack again, then we'll know how to reach their dimension. We've proven it can be done. The threat of retaliation is real now, but I don't think we'll need it. You didn't see what I saw. The Voidborn were dying slowly but certainly. We offered them life. That means something. Lieutenant Maria Santos, her uniform still scorched from the battle she had fought, stood to speak. I lost friends in that dimension. Good people who died fighting Voidborn extremists. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But I also saw Voidborn refugees, millions of them, just trying to survive. I saw their children, if you can call them that. I saw a civilization at the end of its rope, doing terrible things because they had no other choice. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We've all done terrible things when we thought survival depended on it. Every species in this chamber has a history of violence when threatened. The Voidborn are no different. They're just better at it. Elderstone That Dreams moved forward, his massive stone body grinding against the chamber floor. The human speaks truth. Our species, the Granite Speakers, once destroyed an entire star system to prevent a plague from spreading. We killed billions to save trillions. At the time, we saw no alternative. In retrospect, perhaps there were options we did not consider because we were too focused on survival. Other delegates began to speak, sharing similar stories. The Kelthari had once wiped out a sentient fungal species because they competed for the same resources. The Quorum had erased 3 artificial intelligent civilizations they deemed threats to order. Every elder species had blood on their hands, decisions made in desperation that they regretted in hindsight. We are not innocent. Threshold of knowing admitted, their light dimming with shame. We judge the Voidborn as monsters, but we have all been monsters when survival demanded it.
Perhaps that is why we could not defeat them.
We were fighting our own reflection. The debate continued for days. The galaxy grappled with a question it had never seriously considered. What did you do with an enemy who was no longer a threat? The instinct was to demand punishment, to see justice for the 4,000 worlds that had been destroyed. But punishment served the living, not the dead, and the living needed to decide what kind of galaxy they wanted to build. Chen found Kwame 3 days after the return, standing on an observation deck looking out at Earth. The blue planet hung in space, safe for the first time in months. The voidborn rifts that had been slowly spreading toward human space had closed. The threat was over. How do you feel? She asked him. Exhausted, guilty, relieved, all at once. He did not look at her, kept his eyes on Earth. I made a choice in that dimension, Chen. I chose to save an enemy instead of destroying them. 48 crews died because of that choice. If we had just attacked, maybe more would have survived. Or maybe everyone would have died, Chen countered. The Voidborn were desperate. Desperate enemies fight to the last. You gave them a reason to stop fighting. That saved lives. I keep thinking about all the people who died before we figured it out. 4,000 worlds. Trillions of beings. What do I say to them? Sorry, we fixed it, but too late for you? You say that their deaths mattered. That we learned from them. That we'll do better next time. Chen moved to stand beside him. Kwame, you did something no one in galactic history has done. You won a war without firing the killing shot. That's going to echo for centuries. Or it's going to make humanity look soft, weak, willing to spare monsters. No, Chen said firmly. It's going to make humanity look wise, strong enough to choose mercy over vengeance. Every other species in this galaxy has fought wars of extermination. You fought a war of salvation. There's a difference. The Galactic Council's final decision came after a week of deliberation. The Dimensional Expeditionary Force was formally recognized and honored. The human fleet was awarded the Star of Valor, the highest military honor in galactic history, previously only given twice in 8,000 years. Commander Vex and the alien volunteers received the same recognition, but more importantly, the Council established new protocols. If any species faced extinction-level threats in the future, they were to seek help from the galactic community before resorting to desperate measures. And a permanent monitoring station was established near the Voidborn's new dimension, not as a threat, but as a connection point, because something unexpected had happened in those 17 days. Humanity and the Voidborn had begun to understand each other, not as enemies but as species who had both done terrible things in the name of survival, and understanding, it turned out, was the first step towards something else entirely. 6 months after the expedition returned, the first cultural exchange program began. A small group of scientists, human and alien, entered the Voidborn dimension through the stable gateway. They were greeted not with hostility but with curiosity. The Voidborn wanted to learn about the species that had saved them, and the galaxy's species wanted to understand the beings who had terrified them for 30 years. What they found was surprising. The Voidborn were not simple creatures of instinct. They had art, philosophy, history. They had loved their dying dimension and mourned its loss. They had hated what they felt forced to do to survive. The raids had broken them as much as they had broken their victims. Dr. Tanaka spent 3 months in the Voidborn dimension, working with their scientists to ensure the new space remained stable. She returned with knowledge that revolutionized galactic understanding of dimensional physics. The Voidborn, it turned out, knew things about the universe that the elder species had never discovered. They're not primitive, Tanaka reported to the Council. They're different. They see reality from a perspective we can barely imagine, and they're willing to share what they know, in gratitude for what we did. The technology exchange that followed changed the galaxy. The Voidborn taught the principles of dimensional stability. The galactic species shared resources to help the Voidborn rebuild their civilization in their new home. It was not always smooth. There were tensions, resentments, moments when old hatreds threatened to reignite. But both sides remembered the alternative. The Voidborn remembered what it felt like to watch their universe die with no hope of survival. The galactic species remembered 30 years of helplessness against an enemy they could not defeat. Neither side wanted to return to that. Lieutenant Santos, promoted to captain after the expedition, was assigned to the monitoring station. She watched ships pass between dimensions, carrying goods, knowledge, and slowly, carefully trust. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, growing up in a galaxy that was learning to solve problems with conversation instead of weapons. "Do you think it'll last?" her second officer asked one day, watching a void-born vessel dock with the station to deliver dimensional technology. "I don't know," Santos admitted, "but I think we have a chance." Both sides paid too high a price to throw it away casually. Admiral Kwame Osei retired from military service 1 year after the expedition. He had become too famous, too symbolic. Every decision he made was analyzed by a galaxy looking for leadership. He retreated to a quiet life, teaching at a military academy where he tried to pass on what he had learned. On his final day of active duty, Ambassador Chen came to see him. She had been promoted too, now serving as humanity's primary representative to the Galactic Council. Earth's voice had grown from a whisper to a roar in just 1 year. "The Council wants to offer you a position," she told him. "Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense Forces. It's mostly ceremonial, but you'd be the first human to hold such a rank." Kwame shook his head. "I'm done being a symbol. Let someone else carry that weight. Then what will you do?" "Teach right, maybe try to figure out what we did right so we can do it again if we need to." He smiled. "We got lucky, Chen, incredibly lucky. We went into that dimension expecting to fight, and we found an enemy we could negotiate with. Next time we might not be so fortunate. Then we'll have to make our own luck," Chen replied. "The way we always have." Kwame looked out at the stars one last time from his office. Somewhere out there in a pocket dimension held together by hope and mathematics, the Voidborn were building a new civilization. They would never reclaim their former glory. Their population had been reduced by half in the transition to the new dimension. They lived in a space barely large enough for a few solar systems, but they lived, and that mattered. The galaxy had learned something profound in those 17 days. The strongest military force in known history had failed to defeat the Voidborn, but a tiny expedition of barely 80 ships had succeeded, not by being stronger but by being smarter. By seeing beyond the immediate conflict to the root cause, humanity had not made the Voidborn vanish through superior firepower. They had not erased the enemy from existence. They had done something far more difficult and far more important. They had shown the enemy another path. They had proven that survival did not require the destruction of others. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy's understanding of what strength meant. Power was not just the ability to destroy, it was also the courage to create, to build, to offer mercy when vengeance would be easier. 5 years after the expedition, the first Voidborn embassy opened on Earth. It was a controversial decision. Many humans still remembered the terror of watching the enemy advance across the galaxy, knowing Earth would eventually be in their path. But the embassy stood as a symbol of what had been achieved. The ambassador was a Voidborn named Convergence of Paths, who had been part of the Queen Nexus's council. They spoke through a translation device, their voice like wind through canyons. "We come in peace," they said at the opening ceremony. "Not because we have become peaceful, but because we no longer need to be violent. Your species gave us that gift. We will not forget." Ambassador Chen, now elderly and gray, stood beside them. "We didn't do it alone," she reminded the assembled crowd. "Humans provided the courage. The Kelthari provided the technology. The Granite Speakers provided the wisdom. It took all of us working together to achieve what none of us could do alone. That became humanity's legacy, not as the species that defeated the Voidborn, but as the species that brought the galaxy together to save them. Not as warriors, though they had proven their courage in battle, but as bridge builders seeing connections where others saw only divisions. The story of the Dimensional Expeditionary Force became legend. Children across the galaxy learned about the tiny fleet that did the impossible, about Admiral Kwame Osei who chose salvation over destruction, about Dr. Yuki Tanaka who built a dimension from theory and desperation, about Commander Vex and the young aliens who followed humanity's lead, about Lieutenant Maria Santos who fought not for victory, but for the chance to offer peace, and about Ambassador Chen Wei, who had started it all by standing in a council chamber and asking a simple question: what could humans possibly offer? The answer, it turned out, was everything. Not superior technology or ancient wisdom, but fresh eyes to see old problems in new ways, the courage to try the impossible, and most importantly, the empathy to see the being behind the monster and offer them a hand instead of a fist. The galaxy had watched humanity enter the war zone expecting to see them die. Instead, they watched something far more remarkable. They watched humans do what everyone said was impossible. They watched the Voidborn vanish, not destroyed but saved, relocated beyond all conventional dimensions to a new home built from hope and mathematics. And the galaxy learned that the young species from Earth, barely a century into space travel, had something to teach civilizations that had existed for millennia. Sometimes the greatest victory was not defeating your enemy. It was showing them they did not need to be your enemy at all. The war had ended. The Voidborn were gone from the normal universe, and in their place was something the galaxy had not seen in 30 years. A future worth believing in. Humanity had entered the war zone. The foe had vanished beyond all dimensions, but it was not through destruction. It was through the radical act of compassion, and that made all the difference. The story did not end there, of course. There would be new challenges, new threats, new conflicts, but the galaxy faced them with a new tool in their arsenal, the knowledge that even the most terrifying enemy might just be a desperate friend in disguise. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do was put down your weapon and offer your hand. That was humanity's gift to the stars. Not violence, though they could fight when needed, but the radical belief that there was always another way, if you were brave enough to look for it. And sometimes, just sometimes, that belief was enough to change everything.